You can drive from the Arctic Ocean to the edge of the Amazon. You can cross deserts, scale mountain passes, and glide along endless coastlines. But if you try to drive from Alaska to Argentina, your journey doesn't end at some grand border crossing. It ends in a wall of jungle, mud, and mystery where the road simply dies. This is the untold story behind that impossible road trip. A story of a 60-mile gap that defeated presidents, humbled engineers, terrified migrants, and somehow became one of the most important untouched places on Earth. Picture this. You've been driving for weeks. You started in the frozen reaches of Alaska, rolled through Canada's endless forests, cruised down American interstates, threaded through Mexico's deserts, and bounced across the narrow waste of Central America. The signs tell you you're close to South America. You expect a bridge, a tunnel, a border checkpoint. Instead, the pavement crumbles. The last concrete slab breaks apart into dirt. Then the dirt disappears into an ocean of swamp and trees. No road, no tracks, just the infamous Darién Gap. At first glance, it looks like someone simply forgot to finish the highway. But this is not some lazy oversight. The Darién Gap is not a missing piece. It is a deliberate, defiant blank. To understand how that blank survived, you have to start with a dream that began over 100 years ago. In 1923, representatives from across the Americas met in Santiago, Chile, with an idea that sounded almost romantic. What if the entire Western Hemisphere was woven together by one unbroken highway? A single route stretching from the very top of Alaska all the way to the southern tip of Argentina. It wasn't just a transport project, it was a symbol. A concrete expression of a bigger idea, that the nations of the Americas shared a common destiny, a sense of unity, a Pan-American identity. By the 1930s, this dream wasn't just talk. Plans took shape. The proposed Pan-American highway would start up near Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, slide through Canada, cascade through the United States, and then follow the spine of the Rockies and the Sierra Madre through Mexico. After that, it would snake across the tight chain of Central American countries, then hug the Pacific coast of South America before cutting across toward Buenos Aires and down to Argentina's southernmost point. On paper, it looked magnificent, a road that tied together cities, ports, farms, and remote villages, a path for trade trucks, tourists, and dreamers who wanted to drive the world's longest road. In reality, it was chaos. There was no single construction team building the whole thing. Each country handled its own stretch. Different governments, different budgets, different engineering standards. Some stretches were modern 4-lane highways. Others were barely paved lanes winding through mountains and jungle. It was less like building one road and more like assembling a jigsaw puzzle where every piece was made by a different person using a different rulebook. Yet somehow, piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Gaps closed. Bridges rose. Border crossings got connected. The dream, unbelievably, started to look real until the cruise reached Darién. Darién sits between Panama and Colombia, right where Central America connects to South America. On a map, it looks simple. Just fill in that tiny break and you're done. 60 miles. Modern civilizations dig tunnels twice that length and throw bridges across wider stretches of sea. So why not here? Because the Darién Gap is not normal terrain. It is nature's boldest no trespassing sign. Imagine the densest jungle you've ever seen, then make it thicker. Vines twist over trees that tower into dark canopies. The air is wet, heavy, and hot. The ground is mud so deep and soft it doesn't just grab your boots, it can swallow trucks. Rain falls in brutal, relentless sheets, especially from May to December. Trails that look solid in the morning dissolve into rivers of sludge by afternoon. Rivers slash through the region, but they aren't friendly or predictable. They surge with flash floods that can tear away equipment, bridges, and entire chunks of ground without warning. One moment, a shallow crossing. The next, a roaring death trap. Then there is the wildlife, venomous snakes that strike without warning, scorpions hiding where you least expect them, crocodiles cruising the brown, slow-moving waters, and the most dangerous threat of all, Mosquitoes carrying malaria, dengue, yellow fever. You don't see them coming. You only feel the fever later. An American journalist who trekked through the gap once described the ground as constantly shifting beneath his feet. Every step in waterlogged boots felt like an ankle injury waiting to happen. Thorns tore his clothes and sliced his skin. Even drenched in repellent, mosquitoes still bit him everywhere. His conclusion was simple. The jungle doesn't just challenge visitors, it actively tries to consume them. This is not the kind of place you casually send a construction crew. It's barely survivable for small, well-equipped teams. Now imagine trying to bring in machinery, heavy trucks, fuel, and food. Imagine trying to maintain a stable road that wouldn't just vanish with the next storm. When early engineering teams scouted the area, they tried to be clever. Maybe the coastline would provide an easier route. A scenic highway along the shore, perhaps. But what they found were rugged, impassable headlands and countless river mouths. Each river crossing would demand another bridge, another complex structure in a brutal environment. So they turned inland. That's when they confronted the Atrato Swamp. This isn't your average wetland. It's a vast basin laced with rivers and creeks, a huge soup of mud and water. To understand how bad it was, engineers performed a simple test. They dropped heavy barrels into the swamp and waited to see when they would hit solid ground. They sank and sank and kept sinking. It took the equivalent of 15 stories of depth before anything resembling solid ground stopped them. Now consider what that means. Modern mega-bridges like the one linking Hong Kong, Zhuhai, and Macau rely on solid bedrock to anchor their colossal supports. In the Atrato Swamp, there is no stable base. You can't easily set foundations. A floating bridge might seem like an option, but the longest existing floating bridges in the world are far shorter than what would be needed here. The scale, the instability, and the constant assault of rain and floods would push any design close to the edge of feasibility. Yet even with all that, engineers did not entirely give up. By the 1990s, a Colombian firm produced perhaps the most promising plan ever. Instead of plunging straight through the worst parts, they charted a course that zigzagged around the nastiest swamps, sticking to higher, more stable ground where possible. It wouldn't be easy. It would need massive amounts of concrete, steel, and determination. But in pure technical terms, it wasn't impossible. Nature, however, was only half the story. Because while surveyors were wrestling with mud, another battle was brewing in courtrooms, ministries, and public opinion. The Darién Gap doesn't just block cars and trucks. It also protects something far more delicate. Ecologists consider the region a biodiversity hotspot. Within that relatively small area, there are over 100 species of mammals, including critically endangered ones like the brown-headed spider monkey. Elusive, heavy-bodied tapirs slip quietly through the undergrowth. Thousands of unique insects, plants, and other species exist nowhere else on the planet. And the gap does something subtle but huge. It acts as a natural barrier between the ecosystems of North and South America. That barrier limits which animals can cross and settle. Some species that thrive in the north are stopped before they can flood south and disrupt food chains that have evolved over millions of years. Take coyotes, for example. They are native to North America. If they were to spread deep into South America unchecked, they could wreak havoc on local animals like capybaras, peccaries, and various rodents. In the Darién, jaguars patrol the jungle and pick off coyotes that try to push through, stopping them from becoming a full-blown invasive threat further south. That invisible wall of ecological separation is part of what keeps entire ecosystems stable. Then there are the people who have called this region home for centuries. Indigenous communities like the Emberá, Hunan, and Guna have long adapted to its rhythms. The absence of a road has helped shield their lands from the scale of outside development that has transformed so many other parts of the continent. Their cultures, languages, and traditions might look very different today if a roaring highway had been carved right through the heart of their territory. So when big money and political power turned their eyes on Darién, there was resistance. The boldest push came from an unexpected champion of asphalt, U.S. President Richard Nixon. By the 1970s, he had become fixated on finally closing the gap. For him, the Pan-American Highway was more than a romantic idea. It was a tool, a way to supercharge trade, a physical expression of unity across the Americas, and just as importantly, a strategic asset in the Cold War. A continental highway system could help strengthen alliances and economic ties, making it harder for rival ideologies to gain ground. In 1971, Nixon committed a huge sum of money toward finishing the job, hoping to see the gap conquered in time for the U.S. bicentennial celebrations in 1976. He even pictured the route through Darien being named after him. Imagine it, the Nixon Gap, a monumental legacy of concrete. But outside the halls of power, alarm bells rang. Environmental groups, led by organizations like the Sierra Club, staged a fierce counterattack. They warned that bulldozing a highway through one of the most pristine jungles left in the Americas would be ecologically catastrophic. Forests would be cut, animals driven out or hunted, invasive species unleashed, rivers polluted, and indigenous communities uprooted or pressured into assimilation. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, American cattle ranchers joined the environmentalists. Their concern was not scenery or biodiversity. It was disease, specifically hoof and mouth disease, which was present in parts of South America. A continuous road, they argued, would make it easier for infected animals or contaminated vehicles to carry the virus north, threatening millions of cattle and potentially inflicting billions in economic damage. Two groups that often found themselves on opposite sides of debates suddenly stood side by side, united against the highway. Subscribe, share this video with that one friend who loves road trips and geography, and tell in the comments where you would drive first if this highway was ever completed. Because some roads may never exist in concrete, but they live vividly in our imagination. And that's where the next great story always begins.